All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into a huge market-moving event that just went down in Moscow. We're going to break down what it means for global stability and, honestly, for the very nature of modern war.
So, check this out. On one side of the world, in Miami, you've got diplomats talking about constructive peace talks. At the exact same time, on the other side of the planet, a car bomb takes out a high-ranking general in Moscow. You might think these are totally separate events, right? Wrong. They are deeply, and I mean dangerously, connected.
So, why does this one assassination matter so much? Well, to get that, you have to understand who they hit. This wasn't some random act of terror. No, this was a surgical strike on someone absolutely critical to Russia's war machine. The man's name was Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov. Now, his title, Head of the Directorate for Operational Training, sounds a bit dry, but let's put it simply. This was the guy whose entire job was to take regular Russian citizens and turn them into soldiers. He was, literally, the war's head teacher.
And let me be clear, this guy was no paper pusher. He was a hardened veteran, fought in Chechnya, Syria. He was the real deal. He was more than a planner. He was like the military's hard drive, all its institutional memory. His job was to see what was happening on the battlefield in Ukraine, learn from it, and bake those lessons into the training for the next 100,000 troops. Taking him out, it's like wiping the army's entire hard drive. A huge, huge blow.
Okay, so how did they do it? The attack itself was just clinical. It's early morning, in a pretty normal Moscow neighborhood. Sarvarov skips his armored government car and hops into his own personal SUV. Big mistake. The second he starts moving, boom, an IED that was planted right under his driver's seat goes off. The whole thing was designed for one thing and one thing only, to make absolutely sure the target didn't walk away. This screams professional job.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The timing. You have to understand, the sound of that explosion wasn't just for people in Moscow. No, the real shockwaves were meant to travel 9,000 kilometers and land right on that negotiating table in Miami. So you've got to ask yourself, is this just a crazy coincidence? Or was this a message? A very brutal, very loud piece of communication. And yeah, all the evidence points straight to it being a message. This is a textbook move, you know? It's a classic strategy called fight and talk. It's brutal, for sure, but it can be really effective. The idea is simple. You use violence, kinetic action, not just to win the war, but to strengthen your hand at the negotiating table. It's a bloody way of reminding the diplomats in their nice suits that while they're talking, the war is real. And that message was aimed right at the people in that room. For Ukraine, it's a way of saying, hey, don't think you can push us around. We can still reach out and touch you deep inside your own country. And for the Russians, it totally undermines their position. I mean, how can you sit there and demand security guarantees when you can't even protect one of your own top generals in Moscow? It's a huge loss of face. All right, so let's zoom out for a second, because this attack, it didn't just happen out of the blue. It's actually the latest piece of a much bigger puzzle, a pattern. It looks like a very systematic, very deliberate campaign. And the pattern is crystal clear. This is the third top general from a supercritical technical branch of the military to be killed near Moscow in just a year. Think about who they're targeting. The head of chemical and nuke defense, a top operations guy, and now the head of training. These aren't random targets. This is a targeted campaign to take out the Russian military's brain.
So who's behind this? Well, the Russians didn't hesitate. They immediately pointed the finger at Ukraine's intelligence agencies, the GUR and the SBU. And it makes sense. These guys have been running a really sophisticated and gutsy shadow war for years now, hitting Russia where it hurts, way behind the front lines.
And you know the philosophy behind all this is perfectly summed up by this one quote from Kirill Budanov, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence. He just said, "I like the darkness." And that's exactly what this is. It's about operating in the shadows, making strikes that are deniable, and most of all, getting inside the heads of the Russian leadership. The message is simple. Nowhere is safe.
Okay, so beyond the war strategy, this whole thing opens up another massive can of worms. It shows a huge, almost unbelievable crack in the armor of the Russian security state.
I mean, this is nothing short of a catastrophic failure for the FSB, right? The FSB is supposed to be this all-powerful internal security force, and this happened in Moscow, a city with more cameras than just about anywhere. And yet, this is the third time this has happened. The third time.
This has to be the question that's keeping people up at night in the Kremlin. Seriously, how does a team pull this off? How do you tail a general, rig his car with the bomb, and then just vanish in a city that's supposedly a fortress of surveillance? It's a huge problem.
So how is it possible? Well, it probably wasn't just one thing. It's likely a whole cocktail of failures. You've got data leaks on the dark web. You can buy car registration info, for example. Maybe the camera network itself was hacked. But the one that's really got to worry them? The idea of an inside job. Someone in the security services who is either a sympathizer or just corrupt, who helped make it happen.
When you boil it all down, this whole thing just proves one fundamental point about modern war. The front line? It's not a line on a map anymore. It's everywhere. It's in the trenches, sure, but it's also at the negotiating table in Miami. And it's in a quiet residential parking spot in Moscow.
And that leaves us with one last really big thought, especially if you're an investor or an analyst. In a world where a top general can be taken out thousands of kilometers from any battlefield, what does geopolitical risk even mean anymore? It forces all of us to completely rethink and reprice what risk looks like when the war can literally show up anywhere at any time.